Hey guys, welcome to Capturing Christianity. Tonight we are asking the question, or really answering the question in debate form, do Christians and Muslims worship the same God? I've got Dr. Trent Dougherty, Dr. Christopher Tomaszewski, I've got Dyer and Father Ananias with us tonight. And the format for tonight is mainly open dialogue, but we do have some opening statements at the very beginning of the show, so there's going to be 10 minutes for each side. I should mention, we've just lost. Oh, there he is. He's back. Father Ananias, his video dropped out for a second. We're back. So each side is going to have 10 minutes. Dr. Trent Dougherty, Dr. Christopher, they are on the affirmative side. So they are Catholic. They are answering this question in the affirmative. So they've got each 5 minutes for an opening presentation. Then we're going to turn it over to Jay and Father Ananias. They've each got 5 minutes for their side. And then we're just going to go to open dialogue. And then toward the end of the show, if we have time, we'll do some Q&A with you guys. So with that said, we're going to jump right in. Last thing I'll mention before we get into the debate is we are going to, I've got bios for each individual debater, presenter here. I've got that linked in the description of the video if you want to learn more about any person that you're hearing from today. So let's go ahead and now turn it over to Dr. Trent Dougherty for his 5-minute opening statement.
All right, great. So in the fall of 1990, as a young evangelical, I went to Liberty University to be the research assistant for Dr. Norman L. Geisler. He has since passed away, God rest his soul, but he was one of my main first mentors. And while there at the Liberty Center for Research and Scholarship, I worked on a number of books with him. One of which was Thomas Aquinas, an Evangelical Appraisal, subtitled "Should Old Aquinas Be Forgot?" Another one was called Answering Islam, that was co-authored with a student of his that was a former Muslim. And for the research for that book, we had to read the Quran cover to cover and take notes on 3x5 note cards. Yes, this is the fall of 1990. And so I had the opportunity at that time to read the Quran cover to cover, which I had not really anticipated. And I have read it, not cover to cover since then, but I've returned to it occasionally, and I've even had studies on it with some good friends of mine, one of the groomsmen that was at my wedding. And what's clear from the Quran is it's obvious that Muhammad encountered Christian and Jewish preaching in Arabia. I think everybody's pretty much agreed that he probably didn't have an Old Testament or New Testament scriptures. I don't know, doesn't matter. But he clearly encountered their preaching and teaching. And the Quran explicitly states that Jewish and Christian scriptures are revealed by God, albeit incomplete, and that Muhammad came to complete that narrative. And it talks about Adam and Noah and Abraham and Joseph and many other biblical individuals. And in the course of doing this, the Quran mistakenly attributes many mistakes to Jews and Christians, and Jewish Christians in both in the details and in the interpretation of their own scriptures. So, for example, the Quran says that Noah had a son that refused to get on the ark. And it says that Aaron didn't make the golden calf. And the biggest and most central disagreement is that it says that Jesus didn't die on the cross. He just appeared to die on the cross. And in these places and others, what I want to note two things. First, Islam disagrees with the biblical narrative. Okay. Secondly, Islam is wrong. It's mistaken. The Quran gets it wrong. There are these disagreements, these contradictions between what Islam teaches and what Christianity teaches, what the Bible, what the Quran says and what the Bible says. And in that disagreement, it is my firm belief that the Quran and Islam are mistaken and that Christianity and the Bible have the correct view there. But notice two things, and we'll jump into the slides. And I've actually forgotten what these slides say. So when I see these slides, it will be reminding me of what they say. But notice two things about this story. By every extant semantic theory of reference, reference is fixed by causation and context. All right, that's how reference gets fixed, by causation and context. And in the origin of the Quran, the origin of the foundation of Islam, there was clearly back and forth interaction between Muhammad and his early followers and whoever it was that wrote down the Quran, and Jews and Christians that were preaching the gospel, preaching from the Old and New Testaments. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that leads to the first argument for the affirmative that Muslims and Christians worship the same God, the semantic argument. Premise one: if the Quran originated in the context of furthering the biblical narrative, then its terms pick up their references from that biblical narrative. This is just this is a straightforward consequence out of every reasonable semantic theory. Premise two: the Quran did originate out of this context of furthering the biblical narrative. That's just a historical fact. QED. So the consequent of premise one
1 minute.
follows. 1 minute left. Okay, next slide. Disagreement argument. Premise one: we disagree only if we are talking about the same thing. If we're talking about two different things, we don't disagree. But we do disagree. Therefore, we must be talking about the same thing. Next slide. So this is actually the biggest slide. Like, so what if we're talking about the same God? Absolutely nothing follows from that. Absolutely nothing follows from that, because the distinctive between Christianity and Islam isn't there are differences with respect to the doctrine of God, but it's Jesus Christ and his saving power and his acts, his virgin birth, sinless life, atoning death, powerful resurrection. That's what sets Christianity apart from Islam. And so there's just no negative consequences that follow. Absolutely zero soteriological consequences follow from the affirmative to the question that
And that's
Jews and
time.
Christians and Muslims worship the same God.
All right, there you go. So let's move now to Dr. Christopher.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
If you had more slides, I was wondering, would it be more beneficial if you had more time and then we also had a little more time?
I think that's the last one. I think that's the last slide.
Okay,
Are there other slides? Yep, there we go.
Clark Kent.
This is actually a reply slide, a pre-reply.
Okay.
So no, that was it. The whole presentation. 5 minutes. Take it away. Take it away, Tomaszewski, Dr. Tomaszewski.
Yeah, go ahead and start sharing your screen. I'll pull it up whenever you're ready.
Do you want me to share it?
Yeah, share your screen.
Got it. What I have here?
There we go. All right, it's up and ready. So whenever you start, I'll start my timer. And yeah, feel free to begin.
Okay. Right. So I guess I agree with Trent, right, that this isn't actually a hard question. Christians and Muslims obviously worship the same God, and there's no good theory of linguistic reference or intentionality according to which they do not. As Trent alluded to as well, I want to try to qualify immediately here by noting what I'm not saying. I am not saying that there's any grace or salvation in the Islamic religion whatsoever. I'm not saying that any Muslims whatsoever are saved. Everything I'm saying here is consistent with the thesis that every Muslim who has ever lived is in hell. I'm not saying that there are any good reasons to be Muslim whatsoever. I'm not saying that anybody can be saved without explicit divine faith in both the doctrines of the Trinity and the Incarnation. I don't think they can, as a good Thomist. I'm not saying that Christianity and Islam are merely distinct revealed extrapolations of some near philosophical monotheism established by natural theology. I'm not even sure what that claim amounts to. I've seen it going around. I totally reject it. I am also not saying that all monotheists worship the true God, right? So this isn't just a claim about all monotheists. I think there's something special about Islam, as with Judaism, that makes it the case that they worship the same God as Christians. I don't think, for example, Mormons worship the same God as Christians. Okay, so just a little bit of a quick primer on common sense about reference and intentional action, right? We use words to refer to objects in the external world all the time, and we do so even under circumstances in which we know very, very, very little about the external object in question. For example, Jack the Ripper refers to a serial killer responsible for a series of murders in the Whitechapel area of London in 1888. It doesn't matter who you think Jack the Ripper is, how tall he was, whether he had facial hair, how he committed the murders. You could get all kinds of things wrong about him. Nevertheless, the term Jack the Ripper succeeds in referring to him, whoever he is. The largest pair of twin primes refers to the largest primes of the form p and p plus 2, if there is any such largest pair. Nobody even knows if there's such a largest pair, but if there is, it still succeeds in referring, the term the largest pair of twin primes succeeds in referring to that pair. And finally, Jesus of Nazareth, right, refers to a first century Jewish preacher born to the Virgin Mary in the Roman province of Judea. It doesn't matter if you think he's God or not. It doesn't matter how many of the narratives in the gospel you think are true of him, so on and so forth. It succeeds. So what follows? That it's fairly easy to refer to things, including to God, even if you get a lot of things wrong about the object of your reference, and even if you get a lot of things wrong specifically about God, including whether God subsists in three distinct hypostases or whether Jesus of Nazareth is one of those hypostases. And so it's easy to refer to the true God. It's also fairly easy to worship the true God because worship is an intentional action like reference. There's no good reason to think that having the correct intentional object for worship is any harder than having the correct intentional object for reference. Notably, though, and here's another thing I'm not saying it's fairly easy to worship the true God worthily. Or validly, to use Gavin Ortland's term. I think a sufficient condition on reference to and worship of the true God would be referring to and worshiping the unique, transcendent, immaterial personal entity who created all things, all that exist apart from himself, ex nihilo. Classical Muslims affirm this description of God, so they succeed in referring to and therefore in worshiping him. It doesn't take more than that. It's just really easy, right? Moreover, we have a number of theological affirmations that this is the case from Paul in Acts 17:23 through 25, where he says, right, that he preaches to the Athenians the unknown God that they worship. Okay, we have an affirmation from Gregory Palamas himself, telling his fellow Orthodox believers, right, to watch not to suffer anything like these ill-minded Muslims, not in regard to their reverence of God, obviously affirming here that they do indeed reverence God. And finally, from the living Patriarch of Moscow, I know we have here Muslims and Christians. Everyone is inquiring to the same God, a creator, and in answer to that, we are getting God's real help. So even contemporary Eastern Orthodox patriarchs believe in this. Okay, and I'll save my last slide for rebuttal.
All right, so Jay, when you're ready, we'll go ahead and share your screen. And just keep in mind you've got your microphone muted. There we go. Cool.
All right.
When you're ready, I'll start the 5-minute timer.
All right, I'm going to take a different course. I'm going to have to go fast because there's a lot of slides. I'm going to leave FDA for the semantic theory reference, and I'm going to take the course of pointing out that Roman Catholic magisterium itself has already stated in the past what the correct view of Islam is that we would agree with. And today, Vatican II's documents contradict those previous statements. So I'm going to show that very quickly and very clearly. If we go to Pope Urban II calls for a crusade, the Council of Clermont in 1095. Here, the Muslims are referred to as the infidels that worship demons. And this is the beginning of this turbulent relationship from a crusade perspective. There is an earlier reference to extirpating them by Pope Sergius. 12th Ecumenical Council says that in terms of the, quote, Abrahamic faith, Lateran 4, 12, 15, Jews, for example, are not brothers in the Abrahamic faith because they are seen also as being heterodox, filthy, and like the Saracens, and are in fact supposed to wear different things in public, and that Christian princes, in fact, should suppress Judaism and Jewish power. Now, they keep this in mind because today we're talking about whether Jews, Christians, and Muslims all refer to the same, quote, God. It doesn't appear to be the case. And in the Middle Ages, they thought this way in this. And I understand that people are going to say, well, but Thomas teaches natural theology in the Middle Ages. Roman Catholic theology is guided by its magisterium. That's what Catholics are bound by. It's not an academic guided faith. It's actually a magisterial faith. The Fourth Lateran Council calls for a crusade the Fifth Crusade, and to abandon this duty results in excommunication. So if you do not fight against the Muslims, you are then excommunicated. The Fifth Crusade, 1217, Pope Innocent III again does a papal bull, Quia Maior. Muhammad is in fact Antichrist. The religion of Muhammad is Antichrist, and thus the deity referred to here is in fact not a correct worship. The word was worldly worshipped, but in fact, in the 15th Ecumenical Council, Pope Clement V said that the blasphemous public worship of Islam must be forbidden by Catholic states and Catholic kings, and if they don't, they are guilty and might be excommunicated. This offense should be completely removed. So notice the public worship is not congruent. There we go. Council of Vienne again calls the Muslims faithless enemies of Christ, unclean and blasphemers. Pope Calixtus III, 1455, says that it is his job to extirpate the diabolical sect of the reprobate faithless Muhammad. So again, what are we contrasting that with? Well, fast forward to Vatican II, after the ecumenist revolution in the Roman Catholic Church, Nostra Aetate III says that Muslims adore the one God living and subsisting himself, merciful, all-powerful, the creator of heaven and earth. No, he's not the creator of heaven and earth. Jesus is the creator of heaven and earth, according to biblical theology. If we go down to Lumen Gentium 16, we have the same statement that Muslims acknowledge the creator and profess the faith of Abraham and the one merciful God who will judge mankind on the last day. Now, Jesus is who judges mankind on the last day, and Jesus is the creator. It also notes that in Hinduism, apparently with a capital G, proper God there, Hindus find a meditation that leads them to a flight to God with love and trust. I need the next, Here we go. Biblically, how do we have this? Psalm 95, the gods of the nations are devils. So the references there do not attain to God. In 1 Corinthians 10:20, the gods of the heathens are devils. The sacrifices are offered to devils. St. Fotini is the archetypal schismatic, and this is great because the Samaritan Unitarian religion is a great example of what we're talking about here. What about a Unitarian faith? Do we have any examples of this in the Bible where divine revelation reveals with this? You worship what you do not know. So I can grant that there is an abstract conceptual knowledge, but Vatican II talks about knowing, adoring, and worshiping. And so the generic abstract sense of a conceptual idea of who God is not what is relevant to this debate, and precisely is what is the problem for Vatican II. So Jesus says again to the Pharisees, you worship what you don't know. The Pharisees say, well, we have access to the Father. We refer to the Father and God himself. He is our Father. Jesus says, you do not know him. So the true sense of know is to know in this sense, and they do not attain to that. In fact, Jesus says in the Old Testament, it is the I am that is Jesus. Jesus says, I am the one in the bush. It is not a Unitarian God. In fact, Abraham believes in the Trinity. Islam is premised on Arian and Nestorian beliefs, and so just as the Catholic Church condemns classically Arianism and Nestorianism as failing to obtain any kind of significant worship that gets you anywhere, and this is the key problem. This is not an intellectual issue. This is actually an issue of spirituality. How much?
That's time.
What? Oh, so here you can see specifically the rejections. And 1 John 2:23 says that if you do not have the Son, you do not have the Father.
All right, now let's move to Father Ananias, and he does not have slides, so I'll just put everyone full screen up here.
Thank you. When you're ready, Trent, and Christopher, and everybody. Okay, following the dogmatic proclamations of Vatican II and the last two popes' declarations on the matter, Roman Catholics have affirmed that Muslims and Christians worship the same God, despite Islam having serious errors concerning who and what God is. Much of this is due to Roman Catholicism dogmatizing what is known as natural theology. It's important that I define what's meant by the Roman Catholic version of natural theology, which is different from what Orthodoxy calls natural revelation. For the West, the project of natural theology, which is distinct from natural revelation, developed and arguably came to its climax with Thomas Aquinas. Natural theology is typically defined as being what the human mind, by the light of natural reason alone, can know about God apart from revelation. For Aquinas, as with most natural theologians, there's the implicit belief that certain truths about God can be known and demonstrated by reason alone, without depending on divine revelation. Natural theology, therefore, makes an essential distinction between the nature of faith and reason, a distinction that depends on certain epistemological assumptions concerning the nature of knowledge in general. Therefore, in arguing that we Christians do not worship the same God as Muslims, I focus specifically on epistemological assumptions and critique their version of natural theology from epistemological grounds. I will argue that their version of natural theology erroneously assumes what Richard Swinburne calls the rational core doctrine. I will argue in the form of a modus tollens the following, that one, if there is a rational core doctrine, then the natural theology arguments for the existence of God can work. Two, there is no rational core doctrine. Therefore, the natural theology arguments for the existence of God do not work. Hence, Dr. Dougherty and Dr. Tomaszewski cannot prove that the monotheistic religions worship the same God. Now, Dr. Dougherty will argue that the same referent can be fixed despite two groups having radically different concepts, or what Frege would call guises or senses. One can even ascribe attributes or predicates to the subject that are incorrect and still refer to the same entity. Therefore, the same reasoning can be applied to God. This, however, strawmans our position. It assumes we believe ascribing different attributes to an entity necessarily means we are talking about a different entity. That is, there is no common referent. This isn't our position. We admit that people can attribute different predicates to a subject and radically disagree about those predicates without the subject phrase referring to different things. Our argument does not hinge on the fact that because Muslims have different predicates attributed to God, that therefore they must be referring to a different entity. Our opponent's error, among other things, is their failure to recognize the special semantic and logical behavior of terms like God, which are different from natural objects when it comes to fixing reference. Consequently, Dr. Dougherty's examples will not work to establish his thesis when it comes to God. Different religions cannot share a common nature due to the special behavior of the term God. The argument I developed following Gerby is to identify this error with what is known as the fallacy that results from the non-substitutivity of identicals in belief contexts. There are several ways I show this. Because the term God is not a rigid designator, nor is it a proper name, it operates much more like what's called mental objects in philosophy, as opposed to natural objects, and possesses a special logical and semantic character that makes it the substitutivity of the term God in belief context something that natural theologians assume. Well, it makes that impossible and fallacious. I demonstrate this by showing how the rational core doctrine, which assumes a common referent when substituting the term God in various deductive arguments, leads to contradictions. I also show that the rational core doctrine commits a quantifier shift fallacy. Next, I argue that because the term God operates more like what we call mental objects and cannot be established independently from a religion, independently of the context of rules and instructions which it's used, it's similar to a long conjunct. Dropping any of the principles or attributes established by that religion will result in a different truth condition and change the referent. Lastly, I'll critique natural theology's assumption that they can justify that the human mind can know things by the natural light of reason alone apart from revelation. Although there may be conditions that serve to be justifications that give rise to real instances of knowledge, the natural theologians claim that knowledge exists entails meta-theoretical validation that requires justifying fundamental premises of epistemic theory at the second order. These fundamental premises either cannot be justified because they're merely assumed without any supplementary warrant, or they're justified because of other premises, so on ad infinitum, either being the theory itself, which is epistemic circularity, or gives rise to an endless chain of reasons. The justification being... Okay. I almost got it.
So close. Well, this was
and you get the point.
This was a lot of information, you guys, and I understand that, and I think everyone here understands that was just a lot from every single individual person. So what we're going to do now is we're turning it over to open dialogue between all four presenters. My job is to moderate, and I won't be getting too involved if I don't have to. Hopefully, it can just be open dialogue, and you guys have a great time. If it does get a little bit heated, I will jump in, and we might have to move to timed responses. That's just just worst case scenario. If we have to do that, we will. But otherwise, I'm just going to leave it up to you guys to take the conversation where you think is best. So whoever would like to begin, go ahead and jump in.
I'd like to start with the question to Jay.
Yeah.
Jay, thanks for all the quotes. It's obviously a lot of information to digest in a short amount of time, but I do appreciate, um, uh, referring to a magisterial body of work. That's something that Catholics and Orthodox have in common, that Protestants typically are not gonna like. So I want to start with that point of appreciation. However, it seemed like I think every single one of the passages, as far as I could tell, was totally consistent with an affirmative answer. So, for example, that Christians and Muslims worship the same God is consistent with them worshiping demons also. It's consistent with considering Islam so dangerous as to prevent the public worship. I would assume that, I mean, we know that the Catholic Church ordered the burning of Christian heretics, that they not only allowed that they were referring to the same being, but I think required that they were referring to the same being. So I don't think there's any limitation whatsoever on
Well,
the sort of suppression or maligning, as it were, of any view just because they share the same view of God.
well, how could the referent be a demon and at the same time be the true God?
It's
No, I
not.
said they
The
could be
claim is
both.
just that there are multiple. Yeah, the claim is just that there are multiple references, right? They worship more than one entity.
Who? Muslims?
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
imagine that the claim there is historically early Muslims, at the transition into Islam from Arabian polytheism,
Yeah.
there was presumably a
Mhm.
transition period where they're both worshiping the true God and their pagan deities who might well be demons.
This
Yeah.
isn't the transition period. This is
Just
well
like
into the
just
Middle
like the
Ages.
Jewish, just like the
No,
Yeah,
Jews
but
no,
did.
but I don't
But
grant
the
that
that's
Jews.
referring to the
quotation
religion.
I don't
the
grant that
quotation is
Jews.
Sorry,
from the
Christopher, go
Middle
ahead.
Ages. Sorry, the
This is
quotation
well
is from
into
the
the
Middle
history of
Ages.
Islam. It is not early Islam. The
Uh,
1200s is not early
citation
Islam.
needed. Citation needed. I
The
mean,
citation was
you're
given in my opening statement. The medieval councils that I referred to. Do you want me to bring them back up?
you're more than welcome to. I concede that the quotations are from the Middle Ages. I'm questioning what period those quotations are referring to in Islamic history.
Are you familiar with Islamic history?
Not very much. That's why I'm asking the question.
Okay. Now I know Trent is. So let's
I
bring this
am
back
very.
up. Right.
By the way, does
Now,
it seem a bit bizarre to say that though? I mean, if obviously we have a quote here that's saying that they worship demons, to simply go, well, they might have actually changed, and that's not a great argument, wouldn't you think?
well,
I mean,
he's
you'd
wrong.
have to have
No,
more
that,
substance
He's
to.
factually
there's not an
wrong that
argument.
it's not early Islam, first of all, so that's factually wrong. Secondly, it's the Pope himself saying that they worship the demonic, which is equivalent to
Where
the argument. It's equivalent to the argument that Paul is making when he says that the things that the pagans and the infidels worship, they sacrifice to demons, and Paul says that that's what infidels do. The Pope consistently throughout the Middle Ages, many popes call them infidels.
okay,
Yeah, because they
so
don't
I mean,
believe in
this is
Jesus. They don't believe in
Yeah, exactly.
Christianity. They are
Yeah,
infidels.
and what does 1 John 2:22 and 23 say if you don't believe Jesus?
Your father's the devil.
What does it specifically say in the text? You don't know? Let's go to that. Do you want me to go to that?
In
well, I would
Greek
like you.
or what?
Hold on. First of all, I would like you to
In the
show
Greek.
us
So
where in that.
If you can put up
go
I'd
ahead.
the
like to see where in the original quotation that you just had up it says anything about which period of Islamic history the Pope in question is referring to.
He's referring to calling a crusade about present day circumstances. Urban II, you didn't know
but that
this?
But
He's
that
calling the
doesn't
present
mean that
one.
he's not faulting it for its origins. That just doesn't follow. It
He
just
is
doesn't
saying
follow.
they are demon worshipers. So you're trying to change
Yeah.
it to make it what it's not saying. Look, what does 1 John 2 say there?
No.
No. What does 1 John 2
So
say? What does 1 John 2 say?
the claim I literally can't see it. The
Okay, I'll
claim
read it to you.
here
Let me read
is
it to
that
you.
Muslims do worship demons. Well, there's nothing about, if we just stick to the logic of it. I mean, I think the history is
No,
interesting,
it's not
but
logical, because if they
for,
worship demons, then the referent isn't the Father.
no, you're
The
missing the
referent of
point,
what?
Jay. The point is that any person, Muslim or otherwise, could, just like the Jews did at times, worship both the true God and demons. So there is just a logical non sequitur from they
No, but
worship demons to
what did
they
I
don't
argue?
worship the
I
same
argued
God.
that
That's
I
the
argued that
simple point. Nope, that's it. Nope, that's it. That's
Hey,
the
don't tell
simple
me
point.
nope.
It's a non
That wasn't
sequitur.
what I argued. What my argument was is that Vatican II causes the ambiguity by saying that Muslims worship, adore the one true God and know him. That ambiguity leaves it open as if that worship is accepted and that it is a genuine pipeline to God. And it is not, because as 1 John 2 says, if you deny the Son, you do not have the Father. And so Islam is predicated
Do
on.
not have the Father. Have
Oh wait, I
and
have a
refer to are
question.
totally different relations. There's just
What do you,
this is
total
just
bullshit.
not,
You're just
you
making
need
up
to
stuff.
cut the
It means you don't
threads
have
more
the Father.
finely.
You lose the Father. All heretics lose the Father. You're saying, no, this is basic Christianity. Do
Have
you think,
and refer
how
to.
did Basil write about
Have and
eunomias?
refer to.
How did Basil write
What do
I
about the
you,
think
eunomias? Did Basil think the
what do you
eunomias
mean by
what's
had the
what
Father?
do you
Father
mean?
Ananias trying to say? What's that,
Oh,
Father Ananias?
so in light of what you're saying too, I'm sorry to be a nerd and bring it back to causal theories or reference, but I'm sure you'll appreciate this. So let's suppose I grant you that maybe there are multiple demons that they're worshiping, but doesn't that, let's suppose one of the things that you said is that context and causation, so a causal theory of reference as far as fixing the referent.
Mm-hmm.
If they're worshiping demons and the revelation to Muhammad comes from a demon, which by the very admitting that they're worshiping demons, at the very least, is possible, wouldn't that actually fix the referent to not actually be the one true God? Isn't that possible according to causal theory of reference?
The referent of
I
what?
don't think so.
Okay, well, that's
So
good that you
if
don't
the
think
devil
that's a really good argument.
came and revealed to Muhammad the revelation that he received, and he thinks or calls it whatever, because again, this is not a rigid designator. This word can mean multiple things in multiple possible worlds. You're saying that causal is not enough to fix the referent to something else?
Well,
Why
no,
would it?
that's it.
You
I
mean,
mean, the
sorry,
point. The
sorry,
point is
Trent, can
that
I,
even when Satan refers to God, Satan talks about God. He's referring to actual God. And so, even if a demon is behind the writing of the Quran, it doesn't change the fact that the word Allah refers to God.
Does Vatican II say
There's just no
worship and
connection
adore?
there. There's no
Does
connection there.
Vatican II say worship and adore?
What's the question?
Does Vatican II use the terms worship and adore?
Probably lots of times.
Why are you eating on? That's completely disrespectul to eat
Wait,
on
I
a
don't
debate.
get. I don't get this. I need you to explain this to me. So, if the devil appears to you and says, "Well, I'm actually God," and you're saying, given that causal theory of reference, we're
No,
still
no, no.
doesn't
I'm
matter.
saying
You're still doing.
I'm saying no. I'm saying if the devil appears to you and says, "Look, God is lying to you. You shall not surely die if you eat of this fruit of this tree." That even though he's Satan and he's misleading you and leading you into damnation, when he says God, the word, it still refers to the one true God.
Yeah,
I actually think
reference
the
is not
example
the
works
debate. It's worship and
totally
adore.
against your view.
Worship
It
and
actually helps
adore,
our
dude.
view.
Stop distracting and playing games. Worship and adore
What-
is the debate.
So if
Who,
I
you?
can,
What are you laughing at?
if I can,
Worship and adore. Is that equivalent to no?
That's not even a sentence. What's your sentence? Make a claim. What
Why don't you
is the
stop
claim?
smacking
Those
apples?
are
Why don't you
phrases.
stop smacking your food in a debate?
I'm waiting for a debate. The debate requires an argument.
Worship
What's your
and
argument?
adore is the
I
text
put up
of
a
it.
syllogism.
You're literally
Okay.
I
not
put
going to
up
address
modus
what Vatican
ponens.
II says.
Where's
You're
your
a joke, dude.
argument? You're just saying words.
Let me-
Vatican II
Just
uses the
words.
term
Let me
worship
Words,
and
words,
adore.
words.
Look at this. This guy's having a meltdown.
what is the
What's the
Worship and
sentence?
adore
here?
is the text of Vatican II. So
Hold on,
you're
hold on,
arguing
hold
about knowing
Let's get-
God
let's
that
get
you can
Christopher-
acknowledge the demons. Stop interrupting
Let's
me,
get
man.
Christopher. Let's get Christopher in here. He
So-
hasn't had a chance to speak in a while.
So I think this is going to be very helpful, right? So this is a question for Jay. I think he's right to point to, okay, right? So the resolution is, do Christians and Muslims worship the same God?
Yeah, the very
Uh,
thing that this idiot on the
it's
top is ignoring and acting like it's not an
It-
argument. The question is worship and adore. That's the terminology of Vatican II.
Okay. So what?
1
do you
John
see,
2 says
Jay?
you lose the Son and the
Let me
Father when
finish.
you deny
Let
the
me
Son.
finish. You got to let me get the question out. Okay.
He asked me for an argument, Thomas. I'm happy
What
to let
is-
you finish.
What is the gap between reference and worship or adoration? In other words, if I can succeed in referring to the one true God, what would then prevent me from worshiping or adoring that one true God?
Denying the fundamentals of who that deity is. So just like when we say that in a relationship, I know my wife, that's different than a conceptual knowledge about my wife, right? We all know this, that the Bible speaks this way. I could say that when I debate Jake, the Muslim metaphysician, right? Jake knows quite a bit about Orthodox Catholic Trinitarianism, either side. And so we could say Jake knows about the Trinity. And in that sense, he knows the Trinity. But he does not know the Trinity in the sense of worship and adoration. And that's the problem text of Vatican II that started all this debate. That's why I keep referring to Vatican II.
Right. So, what is it that is so fundamentally wrong about the Islamic conception of
Islam is
God?
predicated on is predicated on the rejection of the deity of the Son, God as a father. You know that Islam teaches that God is not father, right? Allah is not father. It also teaches that Allah is the creator of evil. We could bring in other things that I think actually disqualify it from Swinburne's core attributes. Allah updates his knowledge. He's not omniscient.
Okay,
Hey,
so
Cameron, can
one
you
last
bring up
follow-up.
my
These are
Superman
positions
slide?
that exclude it from the common core argument, as Father Deacon mentioned at the beginning.
So, okay, one last follow-up on that. So then why would any of that, given what I pointed out about the ease of reference and intentional action, why would even those severe errors about the nature of God make us think that Muslims fail to worship the God that they're attempting to worship, that they fail to adore the one true God?
I know this one.
I mean,
Jesus answers in John 4 to that. And he says to the woman at the well, I'm answering. The Samaritans are Unitarians. It's the same fundamental ontological position as Islam, right? They're Unitarian. Jesus says, you worship what you don't know. So the true sense here of what matters in terms of worship and adoration.
So she does worship it.
But the point is that she doesn't know it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. The
fully,
resolution is
not intimately.
And that was the whole argument that I made. That's what I said. I said, Jake knows the Trinity.
The resolution
Cameron,
of
can
the
you put up
debate
my
is
Superman
whether
slide?
Christians and Muslims. The
Thank
resolution
you.
of the debate. Hold on. The resolution of the debate was whether Christians and Muslims worship the same God. If you concede that it's possible to worship the true God even without, in some sense, knowing Him, then you've just conceded the debate.
I'm not conceding that because the point of the passage is that the knowledge is not getting you anywhere. Islam is predicated on rejecting the Son, and as
What do you mean
John
by getting anywhere? Getting anywhere in
So
terms
what?
of salvation? Because I agree with that. Who cares if they're getting anywhere in terms of salvation?
Worship,
That's not the resolution
worship
of the
and
debate.
adoration in Vatican II suggests that There's a pipeline that does attain to the object that it's acceptable, and that's why the popes go and pray in the mosques. That's so they're
No, that's not why any pope has ever paid in a mosque. That's not
not why any
so
group
silly.
No,
Okay.
it's not silly.
So
This is what. Can I share my screen right here to show you what I'm talking about?
Nope, not yet. Nope, not yet. It's my turn.
Nope.
So I did the courtesy of giving everybody syllogisms that summarize my argument in simple logical form. It's a courtesy, and it makes it an easy target. It allows you to say, I disagree with premise 1, or I disagree with premise 2. We did not get that from you. We got a hodgepodge of quotes and no logic connecting them together. Your argument appears to be, and if you've got a slide, so otherwise correct me, the argument appears to be if two people attribute different essential properties to a subject term, they cannot refer to the same entity.
No,
The Superman argument blows that apart.
rejection
The
of the
Superman
reference.
argument blows it apart.
It's a
Makes no
specific
difference.
rejection of the referent. Is Islam
It's
predicated
irrelevant.
No, it's not. If it's predicated on rejecting that thing, then it's no longer referring to the worship and adoration of that thing. Jesus
That's
is being
just,
rhetorical.
you need it. What? Put it in a syllogism, Jay. Put it in a
I don't
syllogism.
have
You've got
to.
no
I'm gonna-
logical connection between this. Yeah, you don't have to. If you did, you'd
I
have
don't
an
have
actual
to
target.
because the argument is about whether or not the
I
worship is
dare you.
acceptable.
I dare you.
Dude, I don't
Put it
care
in a
what you're
syllogism
daring.
so we can evaluate
I
it
don't-
for
all
logical.
I have to do
You're
is
just
show-
hiding behind.
I
You're
came here.
hiding behind
Listen,
Apollo quotes.
listen, screamer. I came here to demonstrate the magisterial contradictions, and I've already done that. You said that God can be worshipped as a demon and as the true God at the same time. You already made a fool.
No, nobody ever said that. Nobody
Yes,
Yeah,
you
ever
did.
flag
You
the
said
said
tape
that
on
the reference
that.
could be.
Flag
You
the
said
tape
both.
on that. I'll
You
give you
said both.
$1,000. I'll give you $1,000 if you can find that on the tape. $1,000.
You said
Didn't
it was
have it.
both. You said it was both. You said
I said
that
an individual. I said an individual, like the Jews at times, could worship both the true God and a demon. And
Yeah.
therefore, it is not the case that X
So it's
worships
not
a demon
it's not-
entails
that
X
that
doesn't
worship
worship
doesn't
God.
get you
It's
anywhere.
pure logic.
That worship
It's
doesn't
pure
get
logic.
you anywhere.
Learn it.
I'm
Take
not
a class.
arguing the logic. I'm arguing your dogmatic
I know you're not
contradiction.
arguing because it takes
your
logic
dogmas
to argue.
contradict?
That's why you're
Do
not
your
arguing.
dogmas contradict? Do your
Jay, can I
dogmas
just
contradict?
ask? Jay, can I just ask what you mean by it doesn't get you anywhere? What do you mean by that?
I argue that Vatican II's teachings contradict previous teachings. That's my argument.
No, just what do you mean by it doesn't get you anywhere?
No,
I just
That
don't
is
know what
my
that means.
argument. It doesn't. There's no salvific acceptance of God in that relationship.
Well, that's
Who
what we
cares?
think. That's what we think.
completely beside the point of the.
It's
of
not
the
beside the
resolution.
point. My argument is that Vatican II contradicts the previous dogmas. That's my argument. That's what I came to argue.
What
If
does
you
that
want to
argument have to do with the resolution of the debate and the title of the debate? I don't.
Worship
what are we
and
doing?
adoration that is accepted by God is what I'm arguing about. So you can argue something else, but who cares about
Well,
that?
then,
My point is that
then you're on
my
the,
point, listen,
then you're
do you
on
want
the
me to
whole
make the
channel.
point with? Can I put my slide back up to make why I'm making this point? My slide. The reason that this matters is that this is not an intellectual issue, believe it or not. This is a spiritual
Oh,
issue.
really?
Yeah, exactly. I know that as a Thomist, you think that the problem is intellectual, but it's not. It's spiritual. So when the popes act on this Vatican II document that Muslims, Jews, and Christians all worship the same God, and they pray in the synagogues and the mosques towards Mecca, which according to Aquinas are actions of apostasy, that's my argument. You have an apostate papacy that you follow and that you defend. This is your spiritual tradition.
An argument has premises and a conclusion and inference rules.
Interrupt me.
You got no arguments.
This is the argument.
No arguments,
the argument is your dogma contradicts.
An argument has premises and conclusions.
The dogma contradicts. Does your dogma
Can I just
syllogism.
ask another?
Does your dogma
Can I
not
just ask
contradict?
another?
So
Can
they
I just
can't
ask another clarifying
They
question?
can't answer the obvious contradiction between going into crusades and then now praying in the mosque towards Mecca. This is your problem.
No,
Can I
because
just ask-
because it's a false religion. It's a false religion.
Yeah,
Of
your
course-
religion is a false religion. Correct. The papacy is a false religion on the screen for you right there.
Papacy
You're
isn't a religion,
laughing.
bro.
You're the clown, dude. Your pubs are praying in
Yeah,
mosques. and
no, I'm
synagogues.
laughing. All right, I'll pay you $100 if you can give me a syllogism on the spot
You
right
got
now.
fired for a sex scandal. You don't have $100 to pay out.
I love how Christopher and I raise our hands. Here, where are they at?
Let's hear from those guys for a while.
Christopher, you want to go first, and I just want to wait and ask some other questions. But go ahead.
Okay.
Shoot.
So this is why I had in my initial presentation a slide on what I'm not saying and what the debate is not about. I think it's like super important to understand here. I don't think either myself or Trent are claiming that there's anything salvific in Islam, and it's important to bear in mind here. It doesn't matter. It does not matter whether Vatican II says
your magisterium matters.
It doesn't matter.
Jay, let's let him finish his point real quick.
It doesn't matter whether Vatican II says that there maybe is something salvific in Islam. It doesn't matter if all our popes are apostates.
Right,
it doesn't matter whether all our popes are heretics.
Thanks for admitting
all
that.
That matters.
It doesn't matter. Right.
No. All that matters is that Christians and Muslims refer to and succeed in worshiping the one true God.
I don't grant that they succeed in that, and you haven't demonstrated that.
Well, can we just at least agree to talk about that and not whether the Pope is an apostate? I mean, it's just not relevant.
You mean the word apostasy, which you can't say?
I'm not saying apostasy, I'm saying apostate. Do you understand? It's a noun, apostate. You can pronounce it that way as well, sure.
Okay.
But it's a different noun.
All right.
It's not spelled
the same way. It's a disqualifier for your magisterium right there. In the Middle Ages,
Father Ananias, you have something to say?
Yeah. In the Middle Ages,
I'd like to hear from Father Ananias.
Could you worship in a mosque in the Middle Ages?
So, Trent, Christopher, I know it was a lot. I had to speak really fast. I thought it was fast enough to even get through what I thought I timed at 5 minutes, and I didn't. So forgive me.
Let's hear the end. I'd like to hear the end of yours. Yeah, I'm happy to sit and listen to the end of yours.
Well, I want to go back to the kind of further point. I agree with you on the theories of reference and stuff, and use the Superman. That's a great one. Of how we could be seriously mistaken and how reference is established despite these kind of wrong predicates. But that's why I was making the argument that ignores yes, there we go. That ignores the special semantic and logical behavior of the term God. So I'm saying that the rules are different and operates much more, and you're probably familiar with what's called mental objects as opposed to natural. So I concede that. I'm like, yeah, there's situations in which, and all the examples that you've given, I would grant that. But I think it fundamentally ignores the special logical and semantic care of the term God, because it's neither a proper name nor is it a rigid designator, that all the kind of rules, like I said, is like a long conjunct. So when you add not Trinity or not Son, it changes the truth value of the entire conjunct, and it changes the reference. Now, I know that Bertrand Russell had this with his correspondence view, and Strawson's objection is that doesn't work, but they were talking about natural objects, and the way a reference established through natural objects is very different. So that's why I brought that up. I think it's missing the point. And if you want me to go further, I show that, well, if we take the view of natural objects, what you were saying, the way that's established a reference, that we could have radically different attributes attributed to the subject term, but it still refers to the same entity, if I do that with the special semantic logic term of God, we end up running into some contradictions. And that's what I'd love to talk about. So I grant you that. Like all your examples, I think it misses the point. And that was...
Yeah, I'd like to hear your examples, please. I want to hear more about that.
Okay, so... suppose we say, and I identified this along with Gerby, is the fallacy of substitutivity of identicals in terms of epistemic and semantic context. So if I say, and here's some premises, Judaism believes in one and only one God. Christianity believes in one and only one God. Islam believes in one and only one God. Therefore, there is one and only one God, and it's the same God. Now, I'd like to identify, and we could talk about this later, that there's the quantifier shift fallacy there. But let's look at a counterexample. Ahmed believes there's one and only one solution to a math problem. Shlomo believes that there's one and only one solution of the problem. John believes there is one and only one solution of the problem. There is one and only one solution of the problem. Therefore, Ahmed, Shlomo, John, they all believe in the same solution to the math problem. Now, that wouldn't follow, would it?
No. Nope.
Now,
Nope. Yeah. Nobody thinks
what
that
do you
follows.
think is going wrong there?
I'd love to hear about anybody who thinks that argument works. I don't know anybody.
Well, that's the point. Nobody does agree with the.
Well, then
Right.
why are we talking about it? If it's not our argument, it's not everybody's argument. So what are we
Because
doing?
he's gonna say that has to do with it shows. Tell me if I'm wrong, Father. But I think what you're doing is you're showing that a certain argument for reference fails, and the argument would go something like this: you mentioned a quantifier shift fallacy, and one of the most common places to encounter a quantifier shift fallacy is secular textbooks misrepresenting the cosmological argument. And they will say sometimes that the cosmological argument starts with the premise that everything has a cause and shifts to there's something that is the cause of everything, which of course is not the argument, right? Because no self-respecting theist would affirm that everything has a cause. In fact, they would deny it. So likewise, you can't go from everybody believes in one God to there's one God that everybody believes in, and that's what you're saying is a bad argument.
Yes, but
yeah,
and we all agree with that. We all agree with that.
100%.
So my question is, and I want to lead you into this, whether there's something specifically why that goes wrong, other than just obviously we know as the formal fallacy of the quantifier shift fallacy. Now, what I want to argue though is, do you know he was a medieval kind of logician, Burley? Are you familiar with Burley?
The medieval logician? Yeah. Yes.
Yes. So it was really interesting because he actually brought up something known as the Burleyan condition, like belief. And so, for example, let me give you another argument that would illustrate this. God is, let's see, Aristotle believes in God. God is a Trinity, therefore Aristotle believes in the Trinity. Now, we all know that that's false. So if we took a kind of Burleyan analysis of this, we'd say, well, what's going wrong here? Well, to get that to actually work, we would have to have this special kind of semantic and logical kind of operator of belief put in there. That's what the second premise is missing, right? That's where it goes wrong. And so that's what I want to point out, is that unlike the natural objects whose reference can be established through kind of natural causal laws and stuff like this, and like you said, context and causation, what I think that your argument's doing when you move over to the question of God is it's missing that Burleyan kind of belief condition. And that actually changes stuff. That moves us into something like the long conjuncts, right? Because God is not, like I said, a proper name, nor is it a rigid designator. The term God is conditioned by the semantic, linguistic, liturgical rules of all of those principles, whether it's in Islam, the Shahada, and these different things, such that if you change any one of those principles, it changes the entire truth value of the long conjunct. And if that's true, it changes the referent. That's my argument. Now, you may not agree with it, but I just want you to see where I was going.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to clarify there. Okay, at the very end, you mentioned a long conjunct, which I thought was supposed to be a description for God, but you also mentioned changing a truth value. propositions have truth values, not descriptions. So I got confused there.
We'll put it into like something like the Shahada, right? Like, so when I mean descriptions put into a propositional form, that we can treat it like, I'm not saying it's absolutely identical in every way, but the fact of the matter is I could translate that into propositional form, right? Where you have a long conjunct where each one of those variables or the propositions has a truth value, correct?
Can
But
you
the
give us an
conjunct in this
example of
case
what
would be
this?
the subject term. Is it just really more specific clarification first, Chris? Is the conjunct
Yeah.
would be the subject term, right?
Yes, that's right. Because it's the
Yeah, I just want
subject
to clarify.
term,
Yeah.
because it's not a proper name. It doesn't operate like natural objects, nor is it a rigid designator, cannot be determined, it's referent, independent of all those kinds of rules and attributes. That's my argument.
Okay, so I'm not seeing the difference from natural reference because, Superman is not a name, nor is it a rigid designator. Jack the Ripper is not a name, nor is it a rigid designator. And we can go through, dozens of natural objects that are neither, the terms for which are not names, they're not rigid designators.
Right.
They're subject to all of the various linguistic complications that you refer to. So I'm not seeing what's unique about the term God in this context.
Well, because it isn't determined the same way. Just because I can find natural objects that are neither proper names or rigid designators doesn't mean that that is the sole reason why we're having this issue. That's why I said they operate more like mental objects. So what I'm saying
What are
is
the
it has
other?
the
So what are
additional
the other
problem.
reasons?
What's that?
So what are those other reasons? What makes God unique here as an object of intentional action that sets him apart from every natural example?
Because I mean, natural objects are their reference determined by natural laws of causation. That's
maybe.
the distinction. Otherwise, there's no distinction between natural objects and mental objects. Correct? I mean, clearly there is.
The distinction between
like a
natural
mathematical
objects
set
and
versus something in your empirical sense data, right? So a mathematical set, if you have an entire set and you remove one of the numbers of the set, even though there's a whole string that's still the same between the two, removing one number means it's a different set. That's what he's arguing.
Right.
Are
yeah,
you
but
sure?
so
Is it,
real quick.
Father, are you saying? I mean, because that's just sets. That's essentiality. That's set theoretic essentiality, and that's really no different than essential properties. If you take the property of humanness away from me, then the rest of the conjuncts, in a sense, are irrelevant. But still, Clark Kent and Superman, Lois Lane is attributing a different essential property. You're taking out an essential property, so it can't be the set thing.
just
No,
to put a
because
finer
you
point
can
on that.
investigate that empirically. I mean, think about, for example, the Hess versus phosphorus, or Kripke's H2O is water, right? This kind of a posteriori
Mhm.
necessity. Given different description. Now, how is it we can make an identity? How can Kripke make this argument? Because they're empirical and they can be investigated. And those things, those identities, are determined by natural causal laws, sure, in essence, but they're empirical and they
Well,
can be investigated. It's very different than
right. Okay.
games,
So
mental objects.
yeah. So
Mhm.
I think we can probably break that distinction down. However, my argument starts with I don't think my argument relies on anything about being reference fixed by natural causal laws, because on my view, remember, God revealed himself to the Jews and revealed himself to the Christians. And then Muslims' reference to God is parasitical on that. There's no, that reference isn't fixed by any sort of natural law or anything like that. It's just picked up in the normal conversational way from a conversation that was started by revelation. So I don't think, to me, revelation is at the very beginning of this referential chain, and the Muslims just they just pick it up and take it over. But there's no natural fixation of the name God required for our argument whatsoever.
And just to add to that, even if there was some kind of natural causal, fixation of the name, right? I mean, we can fix the reference to God by just speaking about the creator of the things around me, right? That's a causal relationship, God's causal relationship to the things around me. And whether you want to call that natural theology or natural revelation, I think makes no difference here, right? It's a causal connection by which I can refer to the true God.
Yeah,
well, that's
you don't
what
need anything about natural
your view
theology for
depends
that.
on there being a core doctrine.
Nope.
Say that
Can
again?
you repeat that last? Yeah, repeat that last one.
That's why I said that your view depends on what's a core doctrine. So
I think what Christopher is saying is that you said definite descriptions can refer just in case there is an object that satisfies that description. And so if anybody anywhere on earth says the creator of the world is, and it doesn't even really matter what the predicate is, there is an entity that is the creator of the world. And therefore that definite description captures and that entity. I mean, it's that simple.
So if I'm a
okay,
theistic
well then
Saint,
that's my example. If it's an identical referent, then I should be able to substitute it. But when I substitute it, I get contradiction. So I'm saying your account can't give an account for
that's okay.
why that's actually a problem.
No, but this is a well-known phenomenon. So take the Stoic hooded man paradox. Okay, so a guy is in town. He sees a man with a dark cloak, covering his eyes and face, and the guy says, "Ooh, you can't trust that guy. That's no way. You can't trust that guy." Well, it turns out, unbeknownst to the speaker, that guy is his brother, who he considers the most trustworthy guy in the world. Right? So you get this quote unquote contradiction. He is both trustworthy and not trustworthy, but that's precisely what the opacity of an intentional context blocks. There is no contradiction there. So it actually kind of works the opposite of how you're saying here.
And a contradiction precisely because of the invalidity of the inference that you just pointed out. That's why you don't get a contradiction.
Yeah, it's semantic opacity. It prevents the contradiction.
But that's exactly Gary's point, is the mistake that you're doing is ignoring that these belief things, that is namely that it cannot be determined independently of the rules of the religion, which is what you're assuming. And you're just saying, well, they can represent it, but that's exactly what's in question. So your account doesn't give us a clear example or a clear account of why that actually ends up. You're just saying, well, it's just this opacity or something. But Garby actually explains that the reason why you lead to a contradiction that John both knows and doesn't know his father, i.e. the hooded man, is precisely because of ignoring this belief condition that I'm talking about that does not operate the same way in all the examples that you've used. And that's what we call the non-substitutivity of identicals in epistemic and intentional contexts. That's the argument.
Right. But opacity blocks there from being a contradiction. It doesn't generate it blocks it.
So can I just give an example for this, probably more so for the sake of the audience than anybody else? I think it would be helpful to have a concrete example on the table here, right? So we might say something like Lois Lane believes that Superman can fly. Lois Lane believes that Clark Kent cannot fly, but Superman is Clark Kent, so we can substitute it out, and we get that Lois Lane does believe that Clark Kent can fly by substitution, and now it seems like we have a contradiction. But the point here is that inference of substituting out the identicals within the belief context is invalid, and that's why you don't get that contradiction. right? So
Right. It prevents the
you,
contradiction.
you need to tell us.
Sorry, sir.
Are you? So you need to tell us. Are you accusing us of having a contradiction here, or because it seemed like you were a fan of the opacity point? You were pushing the opacity.
No,
point
I'm
here,
saying we all recognize the contradiction. I'm saying that you're not explaining how that works. And so the opacity is not going to. I'm saying the only thing that explains this is exactly what the Berlin condition, right? Of which distinguishes from all the different examples that you were giving of natural objects. That's what I'm saying. It operates much more like mental objects or a game of solitaire versus that. That's my point.
Father, so I think, why do you think that God isn't like a title term, like president?
Because it can mean different things. It can point out different things.
Scripture
right?
is used for multiple things. It's used for the divine energies. It's used for the persons. It's used for the essence. It's used for humans. It's used for angels. It's a generic term.
Yeah, it's a generic. It doesn't operate like any of the examples that you've used. So you just keep using these.
What's a generic term? What's a generic term?
God.
Well, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes I think it's like a title term.
Well, that's what's in question.
And
right.
and it can function like certainly in the Old Testament, Elohim is a name. I mean, it's like a name for God. And if the Old Testament, if the Jews and Christians are referring to this being by a name, it is not. This is divine revelation. This is divine revelation. God reveals himself and says his name, and then those guys start talking about him, the guy who just revealed himself, and then somebody else comes in and says, that guy has some different properties. Then they've picked up the reference. So I just don't see.
Trent,
that's my argument, is that natural theology cannot establish a proper name of God like the Islamic Allah or Trinity.
Well, we disagree on that, but that's fine. I don't have to rely on that. I'm talking about
revelation.
The reference of God depends on revelation, and the Muslims just pick it up. They borrow it and take it over from the Jews and the Christians. So I don't have any revelation. I have no natural theology whatsoever.
The Trinity is the God of the Old Testament.
No natural revelation in this project.
The Trinity is the God of the Old Testament. That's why David worshiped Jesus. And I think in your last stream you said David didn't worship Jesus. Is that correct?
Not by that name. Did he? Did David know? Did David ever mention Jesus? Did he mention the name Jesus?
In the book of Zechariah, it's Yeshua that appears. You didn't know that?
And you think he was referring to a first century Palestinian Jew? Huh, Jay? Do you? Huh?
You don't think that Jesus is the Son of God?
You didn't realize that? You didn't realize that Jesus lived in first century Palestine?
He doesn't know that the Old Testament.
He doesn't even know that Jesus lived in first century Palestine.
You sound like a demon,
oh my
dude.
God, dude! Who even
Jesus
is that?
is the God of the Old Testament. You didn't know that?
Yes, he is. Amen, brother. Amen.
Did Abraham look at this guy? Acts like a demon.
So
You're possessed, dude. Did Jesus eat with Abraham?
Probably. So what?
Probably. You don't know what happened in Genesis? You don't know? Probably.
You don't know? You don't know? Just make your point. Make an argument. This is boring. You're boring. You're boring.
So make an argument. All you have. Look at this guy.
Make an argument.
The argument is that your natural theology fails. All he has is talking over me. Look at this guy.
I don't have natural theology.
Look at you, man.
Nothing that I have said hinged on any natural theology. You're full of straw men, red herrings.
You said in your last stream that David didn't know Jesus. You said David didn't know Jesus.
Not by that name. Not as a first century Palestinian Jew, and also, so what?
Jesus is
What's
so
your point?
you don't believe he's the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament?
What's your point? Make an argument.
You don't believe that Jesus is the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament?
Of course I do. Of course I do.
Okay, so
what?
So Jesus says that Abraham believed in me, right? In John 5?
Yeah. So what? Yeah. So what?
Then it's Jesus and the Trinity in the Old Testament. You were wrong.
Yes, no.
Yeah.
False.
Yeah.
That doesn't follow.
Which one is it? So it's
doesn't
not the
follow.
Trinity in the Old Testament. So it's not?
Okay.
What are you doing? What is this?
$1,000. I'll give you
Is the Trinity
$100 right
revealed in
now.
the
I'm
Old
gonna put this
Testament, man?
in
It's a
escrow.
simple question. What are
If
you
you
doing?
can make a syllogism,
Is the Trinity revealed
you
in the
got
Old
no
Testament? Stop
arguments.
ignoring the
You got
question.
no
Stop
arguments.
deflecting. Is the
I
Trinity
said
revealed in
it
the Old
is,
Testament?
yes.
You're sure it is?
Of course it is. So what?
Okay, so
what?
when Islam picks up that revelation, it's no longer that God.
Uh-huh.
Why would that follow?
Why not? What the hell are you talking
Because
about?
Islam
dude?
is predicated on
talking
rejecting the triad.
So what? This is a non
But it's
sequitur.
not the same
They can
reference
refer
anymore
to the triune
explicitly.
God without knowing that God is triune, just as Lois Lane can refer to Clark
It's
Kent not knowing he can fly.
explicitly
When
rejecting the
Lois
triune
Lane
God.
says
The
Clark
religion
Kent is a weakling,
erected.
she's
The
referring to a
religion is
person
erected
that she has
on
a
the
day rate
rejection.
belief
All right,
about,
guys. Hey,
that
let
he
me
is
let me
a
jump in here.
strong
This is getting a little bit out of hand. Let's let Trent make his point about Clark Kent Superman real quick, just to let him do that, and then we'll continue.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that you can refer to the triune God without knowing that God is triune. That's just simple. It's just
It's not
you could
that.
have a
It's
million examples.
explicitly
You can
rejecting
refer
the
to
triune
people.
God.
You can refer to people in
It's
ways
not.
that
That's a
assume they
false
don't have
analogy,
essential
dude.
properties.
Because the
Jay,
They
let's
Muslims
actually
him
have.
finish
explicitly
his thought,
said-
and then we'll have you come in.
It's called the It's called the de dicto de re distinction, and you can easily. It happens all the time. You can refer to things that have properties that you not only don't know they have, but you can believe they don't have them. It's easy. People do it all the time.
All right, now let's let Jay come in. And Trent, don't interrupt. Trent, don't interrupt.
So again, he had no idea about Old Testament theology. He doesn't even know if Jesus is revealed in the Old Testament. He denied it the other day in his stream. And then when we come to this basic question, I asked him if the Trinity is in the Old Testament. He doesn't know. Maybe, I guess, who cares? The reason that matters is that he just argued a few minutes ago that Islam picked up this revelation in general from what they heard Christians and others saying. Remember, Muhammad was unlettered. He couldn't read. So he was getting all this orally, right? Islam is predicated not just on natural theology. They do have a natural theology. I've debated Sheikh Azhar Rashid on this point. It's predicated on an explicit rejection of Trinity. In fact, in the Quran, there are entire chapters and sections saying you may not believe that Allah is the Father. You may not believe in triad. So the analogies and examples that he gave fail because the religion of Islam is erected on a specific rejection of the Trinity. That's why it matters to go into the Old Testament and talk about natural theology. And the reason that Father Deacon brought up the core beliefs of natural theology is that that's Swinburne and Aquinas and everybody's ideas as to what the essential supposed attributes of God are from natural theology. When Aquinas argues this point, he argues it from natural theology. Vatican II is arguing natural theology. And by the way, you notice they don't want to talk about the magisterial contradictions. That's the argument I came to bring. He's pretending like it's not an argument. I'm going to keep asking them, has your magisterium been consistent on Islam? Can you guys answer that?
So no one interrupt. Let's move now to Chris. So Chris, take as much time as you want. No one interrupt, please.
Okay. So it seemed like Jay's response to Trent there was that the crucial difference between, the Superman example and Muslims' conception of God is that Muslims explicitly reject. They don't just not know. It's not just that they don't know that God is a Trinity, but they explicitly reject that God is a Trinity. Okay, that's still not enough, right? Lois Lane can successfully refer to Clark Kent even when she explicitly rejects the proposition that Clark Kent can fly, which is a true proposition, right? Clark Kent can fly. That's a true proposition. Even when she explicitly
let's let him finish his thought, Jay.
Even when she explicitly rejects that, she can still succeed in referring to Clark Kent and in having other intentional attitudes toward Clark Kent, like loving him, maybe adoring him, worshiping him, whatever the case may be. So it's not enough.
That's why I said it hinges on the question of what worship and adore means in Vatican II. This whole debate came about I assume because of the debate that we had on Timcast about worship and adore in the text of Vatican II. And if Vatican II had restricted the language to Muslims have an idea of God or a conception of God, and I mentioned Jake, right? Jake knows about the Trinity. Jake does not worship and adore the Trinity. Do you believe that Jake, the Muslim metaphysician who rejected Catholicism to become a Muslim, does he worship and adore the Trinity?
De re or de dicto?
In any sense, if he explicitly rejects the Trinity.
If he explicitly rejects the Trinity, it would depend on
That's
what
all
his
Muslims
description
do.
of God. I don't know that. I don't know this man. I don't know under what description he refers to or worships God, so I can't give an answer to that. But if he holds the classical Islamic conception of God, then yes, de re, he worships the Trinity.
Even though he says, I explicitly reject, hate, and oppose your triadic deity, he is a demon, he still worships the Trinity.
The same way that Lois Lane can refer to and love
Worship
Clark
and
Kent,
adore is
even
not
though-
the same thing as a referent, dude. Worship and adore.
Let me finish. So the same way that Lois Lane can refer to and love is very much like worship and adore, right? Clark Kent, even though she explicitly rejects that Clark Kent can fly. Now,
Does Jesus
you
say-
tell me what's
Why
supposed
does
to be the
Jesus
relevant
say that
difference
to
between
the Unitarian Pharisees when he's debating with them? You do not have the love of God and you do not have the Father. What does that mean?
relevance is that? Of what
What-
relevance
really?
is that? I'm not answering that question. I'm not answering that question until you tell me what relevance it has.
You won't
You're
answer the
trying
question because it refutes the very thing that you just argued.
No, because
Look at this guy. Look at this
there's
demon
no
back here.
relevance.
It's a Unitarian
you won't-
position that's equivalent to Islam. It's the Pharisees who say we have the Father, and Jesus says you do not have the Father, nor do you have the love of God in you. It's in my slides.
And you can refer to and worship
My God,
the
it's
true
in his
God
slides,
without.
You said they have the love of God. Jesus says you do not have the love of God explicitly.
I didn't say that.
Yes, you
No, I
did.
didn't
You
say
said that. You said that
No,
he can still
no,
love God.
no,
You said
no,
love. Yes, you
no.
did. Love and adore.
I said he can still love. He can still love God.
And what does
I didn't
Jesus
say
say?
have. I didn't say have the love of God. Have the love of God would be a very
Then it doesn't get you
technical
anywhere.
term about the
So all of
possession
this
of
is
sanctifying
worthless.
grace.
It doesn't get you anywhere. That's the point.
In terms
You
of
do not
salvation,
have the
I've
love
never.
of God. You do not have the Father. It's John 8 and John 5.
In terms of salvation,
Right, it's
I've never
not
claimed that it does.
right. It's not salvific having the Father in that sense. That has nothing to do
Then
with
Vatican
reference or
II is
worship.
wrong to say
It's just a
worship and
big
adore.
pile of non sequiturs.
Then Vatican
What's the
II is
po-
wrong to
you're-
say worship and adore.
Vatican II, Vatican
Excuse the heresy.
II.
That's
You know
just
what?
your
I actually
dogma.
wanna-
I'm going to.
It's your
I'm
dogma.
going to double. I'm going to double my
Can I
offer.
just ask-
Your
200
magisterium,
I'm now
you goober.
offering $200 for you to put an argument in a syllogism that can be
You just
evaluated.
laughed
for
Let's
about
turn
logical
now.
argument.
Hey guys.
You laughed at your own magisterium.
Let's turn to Father Ananias. He hasn't had a chance to speak in a while, so let's give him a chance.
All right, what if I do some magic for you? What is philosophy but sorcery with words? Huh? Okay. Let me address
I
another.
literally thought you were going to do a magic. I thought you were going to do a magic trick, and I was all excited.
I appreciate actually the argument, Trent, that you made, and I'd like to just get your thoughts. I'll give a little pushback on this, and I talked to Garby about this too, because sometimes when you get a thought, you don't know. I'm like, is this crazy? Am I just, or is there something here?
Mhm.
But I did actually find that you kind of had a clever argument about if Muslims and Christians are not referring to the same thing, then there's no disagreement. There is a disagreement, therefore they must be referring to something. And I think Jay kind of hit on this earlier, but there's a way in which that obviously we're saying conceptually, we're having a disagreement about who and what God is. And so what I think would be a helpful distinction, do you remember Tarski's object and meta language, which really was introduced to kind of resolve these kind of seeming paradoxes like liar paradoxes. The following sentence is true, so it's true, and it's false, and stuff like that. And so I thought this was interesting. Would you agree that we obviously, maybe it's not even the Muslims, maybe I'm talking with a pagan Norse, since we brought that up, since my parents give me a pagan Norse name. We're talking about Odin or something like that, and we're generally having a disagreement. It's like, well, no, he's the highest being, blah blah blah, and all this stupid stuff. I see a parallel with kind of object language. We're really having a disagreement about the language and what it refers. That's a very different question at the object language. Is it actually hitting the referent? Wouldn't you think that's a helpful distinction?
It could be. It could be. I'd have to, see how that is developed further, but it's certainly not irrelevant. I mean, it's a relevant and worthy consideration. I just think that there's the sorts of paradoxes of reference that we're talking about um, with God and the opacity sorts of situations are just enough different than the maybe more hardcore semantic paradoxes that Tarski was interested in. That I wouldn't be sure that it was relevant without sort of seeing it developed into a series of
I'm not saying it maps on, but there's something
analogies.
like that going on. That we want to say that, well, in a way, we are having a disagreement, even, and it's possible we're not, at the object language, not actually referring to the same thing, but we are having a conversation at the level of language and religion and what all that's doing. And that was my point, is to see that there was a parallel.
Yeah. I think that's a worthy research project and consideration.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, I hand it over to you.
What about you, Chris?
Oh, so I guess it seems to me like everything, the progress we've made up to this point, has led us to a point where I think Jay is insisting, look, there's something really special about the intentional attitudes of adoration and worship that's different from mere reference and different from the intentional attitude of loving. And I would just love either of our opponents here to explain what the relevant difference is supposed to be between those intentional attitudes picked out by the verbs used in Vatican II or elsewhere, and more mundane examples of intentional attitudes like loving, Lois Lane loves Clark Kent.
And she can adore him and worship him too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me like it's actually very obvious that even if for some bizarre, idolatrous reason, Lois Lane began to worship and adore Clark Kent, that she would nevertheless succeed in doing so, even though she explicitly rejects important claims about Clark Kent, namely that he can fly, namely that he's a Kryptonian, which is essential to him, by the way, right? So even if you deny things that are essential to somebody, you can still succeed in having these intentional attitudes like worship and adoration toward that object.
Well, the worship.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that.
Jay, can you turn up your mic? Unless you didn't change anything. Just
turn it down.
Okay. Keep talking.
Jay, can you shout really loud so I can hear you?
Just start shouting.
Just start screaming.
Oh, he'll get there. He'll get there.
All right. I'm sorry for my jokes.
Can we put this page up?
Yeah, one sec.
So the Pharisees, at this time, I know you guys hate scripture, but the Pharisees at this time had a Unitarian view.
That's a punk shot.
Why don't you shut up, man?
Every time I try to talk, without good ideas take punk shots like
You're
that.
Just a fucking clown, man.
That's
you're
a punk move.
Dude.
Low class.
You won't let me make the
Low
argument.
Class.
You won't make the argument. Listen to this.
All right, let's let Jay make his argument.
When Jesus argues with the Unitarian Pharisees, is this religious devotion that the Pharisees have to the one God who is the God of Abraham, according to them, good enough? Where does it get them? What does it achieve for them? And the reason I brought this up and Vatican II up is because the actions of the papacy and the Vatican II ecumenist project is precisely what is going out into the world and deluding people. And we have two apologists for that whole spiritual illness right now telling you all of this dibber jabber that's supposed to make you think.
This is
That's
nonsense.
not nonsense. It's right here, because Jesus tells the Pharisees that when they say we have the God the Father, does Jesus say you've got the referent correct, you've got the right intentionality? No, he doesn't even say any of that. He says specifically, you say he is our God, though you do not know him. Then he goes on to say that before Abraham was, I am. So their worship, their love, their devotion completely got them absolutely nowhere.
So
And
can I just ask?
I already conceded that you could have an abstract conceptual referent like Jake the Muslim metaphysician, but he does not love our God. He hates our God. And that's why the church fathers and your own popes throughout the Middle Ages said the Muslims are infidels who worship demons and hate our God. You're telling me, well, none of that really matters because I can have an opacity of referent, and so they're still worshiping and loving and adoring the same God as us when they explicitly reject it. And so it's futile and stupid on your part. You're defending the defenseless.
Can I just ask a series of basic yes or no questions of Jay?
Why did you not want to answer? Why did you not want to answer my question about this? You said I will not answer that.
Because it was irrelevant and an attempt
No,
by
it's
you
not.
to lead the debate down the rabbit hole.
Talking about your specific topic is irrelevant?
To the debate, yes.
No, it's not. The worship of God. Does Jesus think that the Pharisees' worship of God got them anywhere? What does he say here?
That's not the debate. That's
it
not
is.
the debate.
The worship of God is,
No,
yes, it is. The Unitarian conception of God of the Pharisees is no different than the Unitarian conception of the Jews, right? In your position? I mean, of the Muslims?
Your question is about where it got them, and I probably just agree with you on where it gets them. That's not the question.
You said a minute ago that they have love and adoration, right?
I said a moment ago.
Does Jesus say that the Pharisees have love?
Here or no?
Okay. So Jake the Muslim metaphysician, same position, doesn't love our God, right?
I don't know anything about Jake the metaphysician or what
he's a famous Muslim apologist. He's the one that knows probably the most about the Trinity. He hates our God. He hates Christianity.
Can I just ask you, so you agree with us that Muslims can refer to the same God as Christians? Is that correct? You agree with that?
Correct. That's why I said from the very beginning in my opening statement that love, or adoration and worship are the issues.
Okay, right.
If Vatican II restricted the language to they know about God or they have a conception of God, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
That's why I brought up the Tarski thing, is just to kind of make, how that talk is possible.
So Jay, you disagree with us, right? You think that Muslims cannot worship, they do not worship the same God as Christians, correct?
If by worship we mean something that God accepts or that actually gets you to the object, no.
Okay, right. So if you're talking about what God accepts, then I just agree with you. I don't think that the worship of Muslims is acceptable to God.
Yeah.
I agree.
Agreed.
But the debate is about, that's why I said it's about the text of Vatican II, and that Vatican II contradicts.
No, it's not.
That's what I came to debate.
Did you get a different invitation than I got? I didn't. Christopher, did you get that invitation? I didn't get that invitation.
Cameron, I sent messages to Cameron saying I wanted to debate the dogmatic contradictions. That's what I said to Cameron. That's what I came here to do. And I said, Father Deacon,
what's
debate the semantic
what's the question that opened? I think there was like a big banner over us at the beginning that said
the resolution.
Do Christians
the resolution is
I came to say that Vatican II's use of worship. Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. Vatican II's use of the term worship.
Can we just clarify? The resolution is whether Christians and Muslims worship the same God. The question is not whether Muslims' worship of God is acceptable to him.
That's what it's not the debate. Well, that's the word worship is ambiguous because this came about from the
So you do accept that in a weaker sense, Jews and Christians
I'm talking about Vatican II's
Muslims
document.
do. Oh, look who won't answer the question now. Look who won't answer the question now. Oh, he thinks
Okay.
Muslims and Christians worship
I
the same
told Cameron
God.
what I
He
came to debate.
absolutely does.
I told Cameron
This is
what I
awesome.
came to debate, which is
This
Vatican
is
II.
better than I ever could have believed this would be.
So sorry to jump
awesome.
in. Sorry to jump in here. So Jay, do you mind if I read some of our back and forth just to clarify for the audience and for everyone here? Do you mind if I read some of our messages?
Can I get an ad real quick?
Can we
Hi,
all just
I'm Father Deacon Ananias, and I drink Spindrift. It is logically determined it's referent to be real squeezed fruit. You see that?
That's hard to believe.
Natural law.
I told you in DMs that I'm coming to debate the Vatican II documents because that's what came up on Timcast.
Do you mind if I read?
What is Timcast?
Do you mind if I read
never
our
heard
messages?
Of Timcast.
Sure.
Whatever.
Okay.
You have my permission.
I said I think we shoot for 2v2 on the same God topic. That's my opinion. Should make the whole conversation very interesting. And then you said, "And bringing up previous dogmatic teaching is cool," and I thumbs up it. So
thank you.
Maybe there was just ambiguity there. But that's so. I did say though that let's shoot for a 2v2 on the same God topic. And you thumbs up that.
I was going to come to debate that, and I said you can even ask the other guys if that's cool.
You said, and bringing up previous dogmatic teaching is cool. I didn't think that that's like the debate topic that you were wanting to discuss.
I said, I'm going to debate that. What do you mean?
You said, no, you said, and bringing up previous dogmatic teaching is cool. And I said, yeah.
Obviously, it's saying that's what I'm going to talk about. That's what I brought to the debate.
Well, like I said, maybe that's why there was a miscommunication.
Look at this soy face.
So
over here.
It's fine to bring it up. It's fine to bring up previous dogmatic teaching if it goes to the question of whether Christians and Muslims worship the same God, but it doesn't sound like you want to talk about that question. It sounds like you want to talk about the question
right.
of
whether the medieval magisterial
worship
statement
is acceptable to God.
Do the medieval magisterial statement. That's why I said the wording of Vatican II is ambiguous. Do the medieval popes speak the way Vatican II does?
What does it matter?
What does it matter? Okay. I'm done. So, because I'm arguing the magisterial statements, they will not answer whether or not the magisterial statements are consistent. He won't answer.
Do you guys want to discuss that?
Can I just one more thing?
No, I'm told I have zero interest in it.
Exactly. They have zero interest in the thing that I brought to the debate because they can't answer it. They only want to talk about sense and referent, which is fine. That's why FDA is here. He's here to argue that.
Hold on.
I'm here to argue the magisterial. If you're not going to address my side and my arguments, then there's no point.
Wait, so you're surprised that people do not want to debate something that they never agreed to debate? That surprises you?
Are you here to defend your papacy?
That's weird.
Can you? Why can't you just defend the papacy?
No. Okay, no, I am not here to defend the papacy. Look at the resolution of the debate, dude.
All right, then then the debate. There's no point in the debate because I told him I want to talk about magisterial.
Okay, that's fine. So, Father, very good. That's a good. This is a good outcome. Father Ananias, can we talk about the disagreement argument a little bit more?
Yeah.
How about that? Y'all can talk about that because I brought this. They don't want to deal with it, so I'm done.
So I think that there's a sense in which I was trying to anticipate like what a good response to that might be, and I kind of thought maybe you might say something like, no, actually we don't disagree because the word God in their mouths is a non-referring term. Is that something you're at all tempted to as a semantic theory, that the word Allah is a non-referring term, kind of like the present King of France?
I'm real tempted. I don't think exactly the same way because of that, the distinction between talk, right, at the kind of meta language level. So and that doesn't quite fit. I mean, there might be some similarity that at the object level, does it just refer back to their own ideas, it kind of self-referential. Maybe, yeah, I might go, but that's why I thought that distinction would be really helpful. And I don't mind, even writing a paper perhaps on working that out. But at least, I'm happy that both of you thought like, well, that's at least that's possible, right? That we could be both talking and not talking about, if we make the right sort of kind of distinction about that. So no, I don't think it fits exactly into something like the present King of France is bald.
Well, because I am interested in, semantic theories, because I do think that it's a good research, even though I'm probably not going to like change my mind, but I do think there's a difference between what I'm tempted to believe and what I think is a reasonable, research program. Have you read Thomas Brogardis's stuff on Evans's reference drift
What does
in
that say
relation to
right there?
this
What does that say to
topic?
Cameron, by the way?
Good God.
Is
Can we
Dr.
mute this
Trent-
clown? What
Is Dr. Trent okay
Cameron,
with discussing dogmatic
call
teaching?
him-
That's what the text says.
Can I
Yeah, he wants me to be muted
I
because he
call
won't. Because I asked Cameron this question there. In the
what state are you in, Jay? Jay, what state are you in?
I'm not doxing myself to your idiot ass. Shut up.
Well, I can't find you by knowing what state you're in.
I
want to know how far it would be
you
to
don't need to know
travel.
anything about me. You don't need to know anything about me.
Would you be
Jay,
willing
no,
to travel to Texas?
Jay, I said that we did
I'm not
Would you be
discuss
willing
meeting
to
that.
travel to Texas?
I'm not meeting you in
Would you be
person.
willing
Are
to
crazy?
travel to Texas if I paid for it?
I'm not going anywhere near your ass. Are you serious?
Do you have any boxing experience or
So you want to
mixed
fight?
Let's
martial
not.
arts or anything
Hey,
like
let's
that?
not. Let's
So
not
this
do
guy
that.
wants to fight.
Let's try to stick to arguments. Let's try to stick to the
No,
debate
he
topic.
doesn't. So I
I'm
asked
just-
specific. Look in the DMs. The DMs. I asked specifically that Dr. Trent talk about magisterial statements. Cameron, you saw that I put up, and now he doesn't want to talk about it, and now he wants to fight. This is ridiculous. This is what Roman Catholics have. You guys are the real clowns, man.
Can I just try to clarify a little bit more here? So I'd be happy, Jay, to talk with you about previous Catholic dogmatic teachings.
Does everybody see that I asked Cameron that? Do you guys see that?
Insofar, I'm not getting into what you discussed with Cameron. I couldn't care less.
Did I show you? No, it matters because you're saying I lied about it.
I'm not saying you lied about anything.
No, the other guy.
So I'd be happy to discuss previous dogmatic Catholic teaching with you insofar as it leads to an argument concerning whether or not Muslims worship the same God as Christians, not whether the Pope is an
Cameron, didn't I
apostate,
send you
not
the
whether
Yes, you did.
Vatican
Yes,
II
you
is
did.
heretical
So
or anything like that.
ahead of time said specifically, I want to talk about magisterial statements in the Middle Ages. And is that okay with Dr. Trent? I told Cameron to ask Dr. Trent that. So I brought that.
Yeah,
to
no,
the table.
I actually have a better one. I have a better one. You said explicitly, and bringing up previous dogmatic teaching is cool, and I thumbs up it. But the debate topic was what's on the screen here: do Christians and Muslims worship the same God?
I said that's what I'm bringing to the debate, and I said to ask him.
Okay,
so he doesn't want to talk
so-
about it. So he's surrendered
problem-
the debate if he doesn't want to talk about it, and he said that's okay.
Well, let's
problem,
let Christopher finish his point.
And then he wants to fight.
The problem with your documents, Jay, is that you want to use the documents to argue not that Muslims do not worship the same God as Christians, but to argue that the Pope is an apostate, that Vatican II is heretical, whatever, all of which is irrelevant. All of which is irrelevant.
That's not what I argued. I said in the Middle Ages, the papacy did not consider Islam to worship the same God. That was the argument.
Okay, we can go
So
back
Father
to that
Ananias,
document and
Here I am.
have you read the piece by Thomas Brogardis that I mentioned?
No,
I forget what it's
last
called.
name.
Like Brogardis, BRO. Yeah, Thomas.
It's not bro.
Actually.
It's not Brogardis. It's Bogardis.
Is it really? Oh my God!
yes.
How do you not know this?
No,
No,
I
no,
won't read any. I want Brogardis.
By a guy named Brogardis.
I would love his
Sorry.
name to be Brogardis, but it's not.
I know. Maybe that's just because I always called him that. Anyway, it's Tomas Bogardis, and Man, I can send you the reference. I've actually got it in a
Oh, wait a minute.
screenshot over here.
Wait a minute. I think I know what you're talking about.
He's been on the show before.
Isn't he but doesn't he actually say, and he's a Roman Catholic, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yeah.
His
But
position is
really,
his position is a
I'm
bit
glad
fluid.
you brought this up, because his paper, and I can't remember the paper, maybe this is it. So he's actually arguing that Muslims and Christians don't worship. So it's interesting that you brought that up.
not exactly. He's providing a semantic strategy to arrive at that conclusion. He's basically just saying, if you would have to rule that out to be certain that they do. He's providing a semantic strategy. So I was just sort of thinking, you've got a good, research project. It's irrelevant. You're not coming out of nowhere. You're not filled with hysteria. You're just like, hey, I've got a semantic theory about the word God. And I just want to make sure that you were aware of all the references that might be relevant to that research project. And especially in this case, because he is Catholic, super fair guy. And so he says that, he's not asserting it. He's just saying, hey, here's a way that there could be failure. Because the interesting thing about his argument is that if you could establish the existence of semantic drift, you could grant my point about the origin of the term and the reference, and just say that chain was broken somewhere along the way. So if I was going to try to argue your side of things, I would try to develop.
Well, I'd like to combine
Tomas's,
that, and I'd like to give also a recommendation to of another Roman Catholic scholar, philosopher of religion, is Georgi Gerbi, and which is just the name George, right? George Gerbi.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
In University of Budapest, and so I think again he does make the argument, and obviously it's quite detailed. I tried to present it in a condensed form of what's very unique about how the term God actually operates, as opposed to, like I said, I grant you the things about Superman and Clark Kent and these various things, and I think he makes the best argument that, in fact, actually changing, let alone actually denying in this, given basically how unlike natural objects that are identical to laws of nature or governing them, generation, movements, these terms specifically. Now, the laws of nature obviously are mind independent. Gerbi argues that things like Roman law or the term God or something like this is completely dependent upon the rules, right? Such that if you did switch, let alone negate. And I think that's a strong argument. So this actually provides a very robust philosophical argument that grants your position, but it says, in this case, it actually changes the reference. And that's the best argument that I've heard. I think that's the most robust, and maybe they can even converge between Tomas's and Gerbi's as well. And they're both, like I said, they're both Roman Catholics.
Real quick, Chris, your microphone, something's going on with your microphone. So can you just mute yourself when you're not talking?
So, Father Ananias, can you send me either directly or via Cameron that reference? I'm unfamiliar with that author, and I'd love to, just add it to my, read it and see what he has to say.
I find it's fascinating. So you were a student of Swinburne, is that correct?
Correct.
So is Gerbi. And you have two opposing views. So yes. And I have a more detailed paper. And I would definitely say Swinburne has your position. Of course, maybe you have different nuances in different areas. But I think, again, there's a kind of essential component as far as kind of like both of your theories of reference that would be shared by, of which my critique is of that position. And I did present this, my critique, my paper of Swinburne on this specific issue to him when I was in Greece. Now, of course, he says, it's a very good paper, but it's wrong. Which is exactly, I didn't expect him to say, like, you got it, I changed my position. But again, at the very least, there's some mutual respect here that I appreciate both of you saying that, like, look, I see where you're going with this. It's a robust argument. There's a possibility with that.
Yeah.
I didn't come in here thinking that, I'm going to provide my arguments and convert you guys on the spot to be like, my God, he's serious. That's very hard, especially for us philosophers. So I get it. We want the kind of details, and it's hard. But anyways, I'd recommend that. I'd send that to you, and I think you'll find it interest because he was a student of Swinburne too, like yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Now, Richard's more of a Humean than I am. I will say that. And I think it kind of has to do with, even though he was, I've got an interview with him on the YouTubes somewhere. And I asked him a lot about his early education, since he was, like, educated under the ancient regime of logical positivism. And even though he escaped from that, I do think he's tinged with a little extra humanism more than what I would be, just because I grew up in a more open area. And so I think that it'd be interesting to see, like, how many shades of gray there are there on these things. So forget about Richard's natural theology. His theology proper, like in the book The Christian God. I don't know if you've read his book The Christian God. He develops an account of the divine attributes that he thinks are more. I think he thinks that the traditional Roman Catholic versions of some of these doctrines about God, like simplicity, they're not. I think he actually thinks they're not coherent, and so he tries to provide a coherent example of them. And I think it's a really interesting research project, even though I don't think the Roman Catholic versions of simplicity and other doctrines and God's eternity are incoherent. But I do think Swinburne's a great study in how far you can push that sort of thing and give more Humean interpretations. And then you've got people like, Christopher. He's like a Shiite Catholic, and so and so and so he probably thinks my view of divine simplicity is heretical. But I bet if he did, he'd think I was still referring to the same God. And so, but I don't, so I mean, there's a lot of, and actually that's an interesting. So let me ask this, since this came up, Father. Would you think that? So the only Would you think that Orthodox theologians who disagree with you, let's say, about this, are they referring to the same? So suppose there's, because I
Now
guess there's
that's
some
actually a
Orthodox theologians.
non-referring term.
Orthodox
That's a
theologian.
that disagrees with me.
Well,
It doesn't refer to anything in reality. No,
is
I'm
Callistos
kidding.
Ware still alive?
No, he passed away, and he
Callistos?
was the one that brought Richard Swinburne
Yeah.
to orthodoxy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I read several of his books years and years ago. I'm sorry to hear he's passed. And I know Father Alexander Schmemann, he's passed as well. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
So those are two Orthodox guys that I read everything I could get my hands on with them. And I think they would think that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. But let's say I'm wrong about that. I do think that there are some Orthodox theologians, and maybe even people within the hierarchy, who think that Jews and Christians worship the same God. So here's my question:
Mhm.
if an Orthodox did think that, would they be referring to the same God as you are referring to?
When they're referring to the one that they're referring to,
Right, sort of a nested reference. So some Orthodox hierarch or theologian says, I think that Christians and Muslims worship the same God. Now, does that person and you
yeah,
worship the same God?
that's a great question, and so I think, and I think you'll agree with this, the fact that they're baptized within the faith, right? We say, I believe. Now, of course, at some level, I'm sure we could find any individual Christian that has some type of material heresy, right? That they hold. There's something they're off about. That's not enough to change the actual referent, right? Because they're still within the kind of codified like language and liturgical rules and all the things that do that. But what I would argue, it's very different when you're outside of that. Specifically, if you're like, I deny that system, like I'm not that. So I would say, yes, they do despite their errors. And that's what my position was, is that those terms, let me give you an example. I believe that the children in liturgy, who, if I asked to explain the Trinity, they'd have they'd have a wrong, obviously, view, if anything at all. I would say, of course, they're worshiping the Trinity. And this is Jay's point, too, is that it's not simply just an intellectual issue, but there's a spiritual issue of being grafted, right, mystically into a body in which the Lord God lords over, right, that is revealing himself to. And again, we're not Donatists. We're not believing that, like, well, what if the priest says something wrong or believes something? What if the priest is a heretic? Does it invalidate the sacraments? No, because there's a grace through the divine revelation, divine energies that protect. And that is incarnated in all the kind of language, the icons and all the things that kind of protects, right? That the individual is still referring to and worshiping the same God. Now, at the very least, I mean, I would take the position that you're not once you're out, but at the very least, I think you would agree that if you're out, we can't really know, right? Would you at least say that? If you're purposely negating the faith, right, of the Trinity, if you're outside of the church, and like Jay said, hating, are you saying we know that they're referring to the same God or worshiping? Because that's a really bold claim. It seems to me, even if I granted your arguments, it'd be like, it's possible. The only thing that I heard is somewhat substantial was the fact that they had interactions with Christians and Jews was enough, but that's too general, right? I mean, we all agree that it's context that determines the referent, but isn't it the details that matter? I mean, how do we know that it's the correct context? It pushes the question back.
No, well, but I mean, that's a fair point, but he's clearly interacting with that body of doctrine, and it's like if I walk into a room and everybody's talking about Christopher, and I say, and I don't even know Christopher's in the room, but I've met him before. He's changed his haircut or whatever. In fact, I could believe that Christopher was out of the country because I saw a Facebook post, but then I didn't realize that it was from, a month ago or whatever. So I walk into the room. I believe Christopher's in another country. He's changed his hair. I don't recognize him. And people are start talking about Christopher. When I start talking about Christopher, it's that Christopher. I think this kind of goes into what Christopher said earlier. It's incredibly easy to pick up reference. In fact, it's really hard to not pick up reference, and the literature is full of examples of how trivially easy it can be to pick up reference, and especially through descriptions.
Father Ananias, I'd like to give Christopher a chance to come in.
Yeah, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Or
hold on,
or Jay.
Cameron, I got a hard out at 10:30, so I just want to let you know.
Okay, gotcha.
It's only 8:30.
10:30 Eastern.
No,
I mean, in 5 minutes, I got a thing with my wife, so we gotta go.
Okay, gotcha.
In light of that, should I let Jay say something, or like? Because, by the way, don't let me forget. I want to follow up on that. So just don't let me forget that, because that's a good.
No, I'm good. I don't have anything else to say. I'm good.
But I want to hear what Christopher has to say.
And then we can wrap up. And Christopher, you're still muted.
He doesn't have anything. He's muted.
Sorry. There we go. Okay. So, Father Ananias, I actually had taken a look at the Garrity paper, Theistic Fallacies. That's the one
Oh,
to which you're
wonderful.
referring, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So I saw him make a lot of the same points you've made tonight about referential opacity and about rigid designation and the difference between descriptions and names, so forth and so on. What I guess I'm still missing, though, is what the key difference is supposed to be between the natural examples that we've raised and the God case, because as I pointed out, we have examples where, we get reference even though the term is not a rigid designator, where we get reference even though the term is not a name, so on and so forth. So I'm still puzzled about what is supposed to break down in the divine case when I'm using the term God. What is breaking down where reference suddenly becomes much harder? Or if not reference, because I know Jay is very worried about the difference between reference and the intentional attitude of worship or adoration.
Well,
That's
that's why I
fine.
let
I'm
him
happy.
deal with that. I just
Yeah,
focus
so
on what you guys are talking about
Real
here.
quick, let's get Father Ananias to respond, and then let's just wrap up.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and wrap the show
Okay.
up.
So if you look, would you agree that games like solitaire, Roman law, or something like that is significantly different than the things that we were just talking about with natural objects? Because we have to see there's an essential difference there. If we don't, then obviously that's what the problem is.
So I think there's a very significant difference there in terms of, you're referring to, human mental constructs, right? Games and systems of laws are not, natural objects. They are constructions of the human mind, or maybe in some cases the divine mind. But I don't see how that makes referring to them any more difficult, right? So let me give you an example. Let's talk about solitaire, since you brought that up. Suppose my 3-4 year old niece is talking to me about solitaire. She's seen me playing solitaire, and she really is interested in it, and she's referring to solitaire this, solitaire that, but she's getting like all the rules wrong. She has no idea what cards can go on top of other cards, etc., etc. But if I ask her what is solitaire, and she says to me, well, it's that game you were playing, Uncle Christopher. That's enough. She's referring to solitaire, even though she's dramatically wrong about the rules.
But that's what I'm arguing is not the actual case with Muslims. So I'm not saying that you can't have some sort of disagreement, or get things wrong, which is exactly why I thought that Trent's point was really good. And I said, yes, they still are referring to. So that's sufficient enough to actually determine the referent in a case like that, right? So but the point that Gerby is making, though, is that, again, this isn't going to work for Islam, right? Because
Why?
you have to see, because the essential, it is still determined, right? The rules, again, by the rules, right? So the fact that if they're actually pointing at Jesus, right, and we're having a conversation about is he the second person of the Trinity? That would be the analogy that would follow. But we're not. We're doing it within the total system of all the rules and the conjunction, specifically them denying it. So I don't think that analogy, where if Christ was here, right, and you had this, and they were having a conversation specifically like that, which you were talking about the solitaire, I'd say, yeah, like they're talking about the same thing, they're just wrong about that. But that doesn't.
Just to clarify my analogy, in my analogy where I'm having this conversation with my niece, I'm not currently playing solitaire. The game is not present. She is not, as we say in philosophy of language, fixing her reference by ostension. she is using words. She's saying it's the game I saw you playing earlier, Uncle Christopher, etc., etc.
She saw you playing the game. That's my point.
Well, okay, so the issue here is just some kind of causal connection, right?
Well, there's an
Am I
empirical
right?
connection there, like it was present before her so that it fixed the referent.
Okay, so
Muslims,
why
that's
can't
not the case with Muslims.
why can't Muslims fix the reference of their worship by saying, "Well, I worship the omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent Creator of all the world, ex nihilo." And if you want to like talk about fixing it in terms of a causal connection, you say the being who created all this around me, and
Okay, so
created
where in
all
the
this.
analogy is the empirical entity that they encountered? Because that was what worked in your. I saw you empirically playing the game, right? So that's what I would ask.
Yeah,
In what instance?
I mean, what Christians have had empirical encounters with God? Like no, almost no man has seen God, right? So and lived. Let's set the maybe example of Saint Paul aside, right? I mean, none of
Well, the
us.
Eucharist. I mean, you
Gen-
believe the Eucharist, right?
that's
So
not
if
an
they came
empirical
in and
encounter with
I
God.
saw you partaking of the Eucharist, and of course it's God. You believe that's God.
It's not an empirical encounter with God. I do
Wait,
not
what?
see. Yeah, yeah. I mean, what I
Well, I'm
see
not
and
saying you
hear
see his
taking.
essence, but like he's really there
No, what
empirically.
I
It's fine.
see, what I see, yes, that's true. He's really there. That's absolutely correct. Substantially there, really there. But I do not see him. I do not taste him. I do not have any kind of empirical sense encounter with God in the Eucharist.
Well, there we disagree with. And that's going to get into the essence energies distinction. And we don't have to
Really?
get
Oh,
into
wait,
that
okay.
now.
So I'm curious about this. So you do think that that what you taste when you consume the host is God? You
No,
taste
I
God?
don't. No, I would use the analogy. I said you're experiencing God empirically, right? So it's not that he's just present there and I have a direct immediate contact, right? The same way, and you would agree with this with iconography, right? Why is it when we venerate icons, we're not engaged in worship? We could say that. I mean, I don't know what you would say on this. I know what Orthodox would say is that God is really in the ink and the wood and stuff without being the wood and stuff. So when I'm touching and tasting, I'm having a direct, immediate experience through the empirical. Although it seems wrong to say, am I actually seeing God? Well, think about this. The incarnation's a perfect example. What are you seeing when you see, if we were on the road to Emmaus or Damascus, as he pointed out, are we seeing God? Because you use the sensible. Well, yes, you're not. The essences of God is actually present there, correct? You couldn't say, well, no, you're not, or something like that. And
Well,
so,
I'm not clear.
which
I'm not clear on what you mean by empirical then, because if you talk about having an empirical experience of God, I take that to mean you're having some kind of sense data of God. You're seeing him, hearing him, touching him, tasting him, and I'm happy to agree that the apostles had experiences like that of God in the person of Christ. Obviously, the situation for us is much different, and so I've never seen or heard or touched or tasted God. I've touched and seen and tasted the Eucharistic accidents, which
yeah, we
appear
don't.
where God is substantially present, but I don't know what you mean by empirical.
Well, we're not going to agree with obviously the Thomistic kind of definitions of substance accident is the
Uh,
present in. All I'm saying is, and you don't have to know exactly, other than is he actually there empirically?
Are you telling me I have to have an Eastern Orthodox theology of the Eucharist to worship the same God as you?
You might. You might, yeah.
Really?
Well,
Really?
yeah. Like I
Okay.
said,
See that?
I
See,
take
that's what I
the
was worried
Gary.
about. That's what I was worried about in my prior line of questioning, was
Well, I'm
trying to
not for this
determine
debate
like
willing to take
where
that.
these
That's a more,
lines go.
yeah, that's a more what Gary said, a more fuzzy area. That's why I said, well, let's just go with suppose we weren't talking about Islam. Let's go to clearer examples of like Odin or something like that. Are they referring to? So again, I just said might. It's a bit fuzzy on that. But again, I know that that's the analogy there, that God is really there. Now, how to say, well, exactly what way and how and stuff like that. All that was needed for the analogy is, for the game, is the child, there was something there, right? It wasn't simply just a mental construct of rules. That's all that's necessary to make. So it's kind of a red herring to go into the details, well, exactly how and stuff like that. That's all that's necessary to draw the kind of the analogies between the two. Now, can we get into areas where I'm like, I don't know, really, like maybe? Of course you're going to admit that. We get in any areas where it's like, I don't actually know where the delineation of where it's like you're no longer right, the exact delineation. Yeah. But all of you can certainly make an acknowledgement. Well, that definitely isn't, and this definitely is. That's my point.
Yeah. So
I think Christopher, I think we should start to wrap things up. I think the main thing here is that I don't want it to be like a 2v1 situation because Jay left. So I'd like to if we can just sort of wrap things up, and I want to give Father Ananias the last word as well. You guys started, and so I'd like.
Trent, you're supposed to remind me what I was supposed to ask you. Do you remember? I said, "Don't let me forget." Ah!
I forgot. I forgot.
By wrap up here, Cameron, do you just mean you want a closing argument from each of us?
We could actually. That's not a bad idea. Let's go ahead and do that, and make it quick. Make it maybe a minute or 2 minutes. Just sort of sum up what your thoughts are on the debate tonight.
Oh,
and
wait,
we would have invited
you
to.
Don't let me forget. Is it possible, Trent, that you gave examples in which we would agree that you're getting stuff wrong or something like that? What was the one you're in the room and we're talking about Christopher? Is it possible that two people, one could overhear a conversation thinking it's Christopher and it's not? Almost an exact similar example, right? That you were given, where somebody's like, "Oh, well, yeah, I know that Christopher. By the way, Christopher's my brother, and he just happens to have all this stuff." Is that possible in that scenario, or any scenario?
There might be scenarios where that's possible, which is why I was encouraging you to look at the semantic drift. In the typical case, the typical philosopher language is going to say that even if you think you're talking about a different Christopher, and you walk into a room and they say they're talking about Christopher, and you say of thinking of in your mind, you're thinking of a different Christopher, you might say, yeah, he's a real, whatever. You've just attributed that to that guy, because that guy was the one
because
who was
he's there in the room. Yes, thank you. I would agree with that. Thank you. That's my closing argument.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Shoot.
Okay.
And I'm happy with
Trent,
that. Thank you.
Trent, share your thoughts, and then Christopher, and then we'll close out.
So I sort of end as I began, which is it's not complicated. There's not a bunch. The word God is not like every other word. It's special in some respects, but it's still a word in the English language. And God, though a necessary being, is still an entity such that he can be the subjects of predication. I'm not a radical apophatic kind of person. And I think that it's just not that. There's nothing here that's very complicated. Muhammad said some things about God that are not true. He denied some of the most absolutely crucial things about about God, that he was incarnate, that he's triune, that the second person of the Trinity was incarnate in Christ. So I think it's like in a political, if it was a political ad, I'd say, Mohammed, wrong on the Trinity, wrong on the incarnation, bad for Texas. I mean, like, I would have like a, that's what I'd say. And that on the one hand, it's very simple. We're talking about the same God. And as Christopher said, once you latch on to the same being via chain of reference, there's nothing that stops you from um, reaching that God with an attitude of worship. Once you latch on to the reference, you're already there. There's nothing that would block that move from I am referring to this being to there's no attitude, no intentional attitude, period,
All right.
that you cannot have towards an object as long as you can refer to it. And then the second part is, and so what? There's absolutely zero soteriological consequences to this. Absolutely none. It doesn't mean that Muslims are just as good off as Catholics. It doesn't mean that they're going to heaven. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be burned at the stake. Now, I don't believe any of those things. I'm just saying that logically speaking, none of those things follow from the proposition that we worship the same God. So reference is easy. Of course, we're referring to the same God, and absolutely nothing interesting follows from that at all.
Chris, let's get some closing thoughts from you.
Okay, right. So again, going back to what I said at the beginning, I think reference is very easy. Some of the debate that we've seen tonight from, I think, both Jay and Father Ananias was an attempt to point out either ways in which the term God is very different from terms like Superman or Jack the Ripper or H2O, what have you, or attempts to say that intentional attitudes like worship or adoration are very different from mere reference. But at no point did I hear anything that would actually distinguish God and the reference to God or having intentional attitudes of worship or adoration to God from the more pedestrian cases that we've been relying on. Of course, I totally agree that God is utterly unlike every creature. Between God and every creature, there's more unlikeness than likeness, and so I certainly wouldn't want to say, to be taken to be saying here that oh, God's just like creatures, right? All I'm saying here is that when it comes to reference and intentional attitudes like worship and adoration, I don't see what the relevant difference is supposed to be between God and hypothetical objects like Superman or real natural objects like Jack the Ripper or H2O that would make reference to and holding intentional attitudes like worship or adoration toward God more difficult than it is in the more pedestrian cases, right? I'd love to hear. I don't think we really drilled down hard enough on that point here. I didn't. At the end of the day, I just didn't hear anything that was supposed to make that more difficult than in the cases we've presented. So it seems like the logic of the cases we presented should hold in the divine case as well.
Father Ananias, did you want to make a closing statement, or were you happy with where we left off?
I mean, I like the closing statement. Like if I could get you to that position, and again, with Christopher, maybe a little correction. It was presented exactly what the essential difference between it would be. You just disagree. Is that correct? That's actually would make the difference. So the argument was presented, right? The argument was presented, is what I'm saying.
I never heard anything. I never heard anything beyond God is not a name and God is not a rigid designator. But we have cases which don't involve names or rigid designators where reference and intentional attitudes are still easy.
So when I'm saying those make it difficult, it's not impossible. That's why I added. But then there's a special character just beyond that. So those are just difficulties. They're not insurmountable difficulties because we have empirical cases in which that's possible. So that's why I stressed and rejected the analogy is that, no, it's going to be a lot more actually like the games in which you have no, like, there's no Christopher in the room, there's no game. Now, you may disagree with that, but you realize that's the argument, right?
Well, I
So-
gave a counterexample using a natural counterexample to that as well, where reference still succeeds even though there's no natural object in the room.
But there was in front of the person is what I'm saying, and that's why I'm saying that analogy doesn't hold.
That's why I was waving my.
You could make the game a purely mental game, right? So like you and I could play a game of chess in our heads, right? I just tell you, king to E8 or whatever, right? And you tell me what your move is and everything. And there's no empirical object whatsoever. And yet we can still have very easy reference to and intentional attitudes towards that game.
And so what in your context would change it then? So what if somebody starts coming in with a whole bunch of rules? Well, the example was, what was it? Solitaire, and what was the other game? In the I don't know, chess, right? I mean, clearly, and that's why it's important. There's nothing to a Toto T to kind of point at that would fix that, as you'd put it out in your other examples. So the child starts describing chess when you're describing solitaire. Obviously, you're not referring to the same thing, and it's specifically because it's not operating. It's not mind independent that way. It's the whole kind of rules and sets. So you really changed the game that you're talking about. Oh, you're talking about chess. No, I'm talking about solitaire.
No, suppose you and I played a game of mental chess right now, right? We just take the next half hour to play a game of mental chess, right? And now let's suppose we come back to it 2 weeks later, right? And you say, or I say to you, Father, do you remember that game of mental chess we played at 3:49 a.m. British time on the 28th of June? And you say, well, sure I do. I remember how I checkmated you in 2 moves, and I say, what? No, that's totally not how it happened. I checkmated you after 5 moves.
I agree.
We could have massive disagreements about it, but we're still succeeding in referring.
That's why I think the Tarski distinction is important, and I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna follow up. There's a way that we can talk about it without not actually hitting the thing. It's like, well, now we're talking about something different, even though conceptually we're referring back, and that's what we get when we start talking about mental objects. It's your level of kind of meta language. So I said, like, in a way yes, but in a way no, and I thought you guys agreed to that. There's a way that you can say what I mean right now.
We're way beyond closing statements, so I'm going to close. I'm going to give a benediction on all of this. Okay, what we've done is which is the best success you can get out of philosophical discussions is we now know what the. That's right. We now know what the core issue is. Now we're not. It's way too late in the day to solve the game, but at least now we know. I think Christopher and I understand where the tip of the spear of Father Ananias' argument is. Okay.
Good, thank you.
And so that's the most that we could ever hope to get out of this kind of debate. That is a win. And so maybe we come back and take that up, develop that. I don't know, but that's still substantive progress, and I think we should.
Thank you, guys. Thank you both.
So that I can go watch a movie. Thank you, Father
Ananias, for joining us. This was a great time.
Thank you
for your arguments.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in too. And again, thank you, Trent and Christopher, and look forward to talking more with you guys about this.
Yeah. Me too.
All right, and I just wanted to thank the audience. We've had a lot of super chats sent in. Unfortunately, couldn't read any of them out. That's just the nature of these debates. Sometimes we're able to get to them. Sometimes, most of the time, we're just not. But appreciate you guys sending those in and supporting the channel, supporting the work that we're doing here. And thanks to all the debaters. Even Jay's not here, but thanks Jay for coming on. And we'll see you guys in the next Capturing Christianity video. So see you guys later.